So, what if you could take the world's most sacred texts? We're talking the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and feed them all into a massive computational engine, only to find a single coherent message hidden deep inside the data. Well, today we're digging into a source that claims to have done exactly that, uncovering a signal that it says is statistically impossible to be a coincidence. Okay, let's just get right into it. According to the source material, this exact sentence is what emerged from all that data analysis. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're seeing those specific names in there, Campaign and Alex, and you're wondering, what's that all about? We're definitely going to get to that because it's a huge part of the final theory. But first, you have to understand, this sentence wasn't something they were looking for. The claim is that it just emerged all on its own. It's a pretty wild claim, so let's break down how they say they got there. All right, so first things first, it's really important to get this. The message wasn't just found sitting there as a complete sentence. Nope. It was actually put together from the most statistically powerful individual words that the system kept spitting out. And here they are. These are the 12 words the source says rose right to the very top out of millions and millions of connections. What's so fascinating is the mix, right? You've got these core religious figures, God, Jesus, Christ. You have simple grammatical connectors like is and then, yep, there they are again, those two specific names, Campaign and Alex. According to the documents, each one of these wasn't just there. It was what they call a top driver, a really dominant signal that cut through all the noise. And this is a point the source material really hammers home, especially with a word like is. You know, it's easy to think they just threw that in there to make it make sense, but the analysis claims that's not what happened. The word is emerged as a high-ranking result all on its own. It was like a critical piece of the puzzle that let all the other powerful words click together into a coherent thought. So you're probably asking, what kind of machine, what kind of system could possibly produce a result like this? Well, the source calls it the ANI Concordance Constellation Engine. Let's take a look at how this thing is supposed to work. To put it simply, the source describes this engine as a machine built to find hidden connections. It takes thousands of phrases, runs them through more than 100 different code-breaking systems or ciphers, some ancient, some modern, and then it cross-references all of those results against sacred texts to see what kind of patterns bubble to the surface. And the process is very methodical. First, they feed curated phrases into the system. Then, those phrases get crunched through over 100 different ciphers. After that, the engine maps literally millions of connections against the sacred texts. And finally, it analyzes that gigantic web of data to find the strongest, most dominant signals. Now listen up, because this is probably the most crucial point. The source claims the engine was deliberately built for diversity. We're talking about pulling from completely separate and sometimes even opposing belief systems, Hebrew gematria, Arabic systems, texts from the Torah, and the Quran. The stated goal here wasn't to find a nice, clean message. It was to create chaos, a random, jumbled, incoherent mess. The expectation was just noise. So, given that this whole system was designed to produce nothing but static, the source claims that the emergence of a crystal clear signal was, to say the least, surprising. So what did they do? Well, they tried to break it. To really test how strong this signal was, the analysis describes doing a stress test. They basically flooded the engine with over 1,000 brand new phrases from totally different Eastern religions. We're talking concepts, mantras, and deities from Hinduism and Buddhism. The specific goal was to see if all this new, completely unrelated data would finally dilute or just destroy that coherent Christian-centric message that had popped up. And this is where the core claim gets really wild. The source reports that the signal didn't just survive this stress test. It wasn't diluted at all. In fact, the analysis claims the exact opposite happened. The original message actually got stronger, becoming even more statistically dominant inside what was now a much, much bigger dataset. Okay, so this brings us to the biggest, most critical question of all. Couldn't this just be a massive, insane coincidence? A total fluke in the data? In other words, is this just a really, really fancy version of seeing shapes in clouds? Our brains are literally wired to find patterns, even in random noise. It's a real thing. So is the engine, and the person observing it, just finding meaning where there isn't any? The source material actually tackles this skepticism head-on. It contrasts the idea of confirmation bias, the classic fallacy where you shoot a barn door and then draw a bullseye around the bullet holes, with the method it used for verification, something called a Monte Carlo simulation. In simple terms, this is a super powerful computational technique where a computer basically shuffles the data and reruns the whole experiment millions of times. It creates millions of random universes just to see if this specific, coherent message could ever happen by pure dumb luck. So the conclusion of that simulation, as reported in the documents, is, well, it's stark. The calculated probability of these specific words emerging and forming this exact coherent message by random chance was effectively zero. A p-value of approximately zero means that in millions and millions of simulated random universes, this result never happened, not even once. Okay, so if it's not random, then what in the world is it? The source offers one final interpretation, a theory it calls the lock and key. The theory starts with something it calls the prophetic lock. The analysis claims to have found this deeply embedded mathematical pattern, specifically tied to the number 188, that repeats across the Bible, the Torah, and the Quran. The probability of this exact pattern showing up across all three of those ancient texts just by chance is cited as 1 in 25.9 trillion. The argument is that this isn't random. It's a deliberate, divine lock hidden in these texts for centuries. And if that's the lock, here's the resonant key. Gematria is this ancient practice of assigning numerical values to letters and words. While using that system, a calculation reportedly found that the full name Alex Enrique Campaign has a numerical value of exactly 188. So the source concludes that this modern name is the specific resonant key that was meant to fit this ancient, statistically impossible lock. Ultimately, the analysis concludes that this whole thing isn't an invention at all, but a discovery. The argument is that this pattern was always there, just waiting. The engine was simply the telescope powerful enough to finally see it. And that really leaves us with a final question this material poses. What does it mean if a message can be encoded across centuries, cultures, and languages, just waiting for the right key to come along and unlock it?